RuneScape is the hardest MMO. I know, I didn't believe it either until I played it for like 6,000 hours. You just don't expect that to be the case, right? After all, there are MMOs with action combat, split-second reaction times, world-first races that have hundreds of thousands of viewers watching perfect mechanical execution from 20-odd players. How can a medieval point-and-click AFK simulator be harder than that? But it is. Much harder. Like, much harder, as in no other MMO even comes close, at least not from my experience with them. There is a caveat though. The difficulty in RuneScape is individual, personal. It puts you at the forefront of execution. Not a group, not a raid leader, you. My intent isn't to discredit the difficulty of other MMOs because many are challenging, from the fast-paced combo-driven PvP of Black Desert Online to the meticulous pixel-perfect execution of Mythic raiding in World of Warcraft. Where RuneScape differs is in how driven it is by the individual through mechanics that aren't present in any other MMO. So let's talk about that. For those who aren't aware, I started playing old school RuneScape a little under 2 years ago. Before doing so, I was a pretty serious raider in World of Warcraft. I had many cutting-edge achievements which are given to those who down the final boss on the hardest difficulty of the relevant raid tier while it is still relevant. And I did so with various guilds before quitting in the second patch of the Dragonflight expansion due to the game feeling, well, it's complicated. Boring would be a general summary, but meaningless is a more accurate one. I've made quite a few videos discussing why already. I've always played MMOs, a lot of MMOs, from FF14 to Guild Wars 2. I spent thousands of hours in Black Desert Online, indie titles, forgotten AAA blockbusters. I've tried them all. It wasn't until my friend and I decided to make a group Ironman in old school RuneScape that I managed to stick to an MMO in the same way I had World of Warcraft all those years ago. Collectively, we've accumulated more than 10,000 hours played, and over the course of that journey, we've had quite a few colorful conversations and realizations about the genre itself, what we enjoy, what we don't, and what makes RuneScape kind of special. Since then, I made over a dozen videos on the subject, discussing in the most reasonable way I can the many successes and various failures of RuneScape and how it, despite its antiquated aesthetics, manages to retain the heart and soul of an MMO better than any other that I've personally played. One of those realizations is that RuneScape doesn't translate. As in, all of our skills in other MMOs simply do not carry over to RuneScape. I'd confidently say that both of us were in the top 2% of WoW players due to our achievements in the PvE space, raiding and Mythic Plus, and those skills carried over easily to other MMOs, from one-to-one translations in FF14 and to general understandings like in Guild Wars 2. It's all the same thing, relatively speaking. RuneScape, though, isn't governed by the kinds of systems those games are. There is no hotbar, there are no rotations, no talent trees, actions are batched in 600 millisecond ticks, which, funnily enough, is somewhat similar to FF14, but even then, these are long ticks. The game feels laggy as hell when you first get into it, sluggish, slow, and unresponsive. The world is made up of tiles on a giant grid, making it operate like a real-time strategy game in some ways, as movement can be extremely precise and turn-based due to the way the tick system interfaces with the tiles. How do you make any of that hard though? Like, the most well-known aspect of RuneScape is its grind, how you click a tree for 250 hours and get a cape. Initially, we felt the same way. We were excited to explore the world without expecting to be swept away by the high skill ceiling of clicking a goblin and waiting. Boy, how wrong we were. If we were in the top 2 or 3% of WoW players, then based on the achievements we've gotten, we're probably in the 5 to 10% range of RuneScape players. Where that becomes crazy though is in how multiplicative the skill ceiling of the game really is. The gap between the best WoW players and the top 5% is there, but it's not untenably large. Like, if one were to genuinely commit a couple months of practice, they could likely apply to some of the best guilds in the world. In RuneScape, the difference between the top 5% and the top 1% is steeper than the difference between the other 95%. The amount of skill expression multiplicatively increases the better you become at the game, to the point where some of the best players still see themselves as substantially underneath the Port Khazards of the world. And if you're not a RuneScape player, that means something important. In this video, I want to try and explain how and why. Early on in my progression, I took the role of getting a rune pouch for myself and my group members. If you aren't aware, Group Iron Man restricts your character to only being able to trade with other people in your group, meaning that you need to work together and create synergies with your skills, especially early on. The most readily accessible way of getting this item is something called Last Man Standing, a PvP minigame that functions like a simplified battle royale with scaled stats. It's one of my favorites. My mistake here as a new player was thinking that the PvP in Old School RuneScape would be about as straightforward as our prior experiences with combat. Click a target, wait, hope for RNG hits, and sometimes eat a shrimp if you need to heal. It didn't take long to realize that PvP is a lot more complicated than I was expecting. A lot more complicated. People were freezing me, then stacking under my character's tile so I couldn't see what they were doing or attack them because you can't hit someone on the same tile as you. I was just kind of standing there while they walked out and hit me before I could click back and hit them due to the batch 600 millisecond tick system. It was frustrating, bizarre, confusing. I was so confused. But I was really enjoying the rest of the game overall, and when I get fixated on something, I don't want to stop until I fully understand it. So I spent half a dozen hours trying to understand it. The movement, the consideration for weapons and armor, the prayers, the switching to different attack styles to catch people off guard. There was a lot more here to process, and surprisingly, for the first time ever, I was actually enjoying the PvP in an MMO. It wasn't intuitive, but it was visible, like I could see what I was doing wrong. A lot of MMO PvP feels like a clusterfuck of spell effects. This felt oriented around me, the individual. And while I will get into PvP later on in this video, trust me, for this introduction, I got an early taste of what combat in this game truly is. It's consideration, it's preparation, it's precision. It's also liking and subscribing. I remember laughing to my friend, what did I just get myself into while processing all of this? What kind of a beast of a skill ceiling is hiding under the blocky graphics of this silly little game? With that experience under my belt and receiving the rune pouch, mostly from killing some of the bots in the minigame, I set my sights on learning a recently added new boss, Scurious, and from there, I was hooked. But before we get into the PvE, let's quickly summarize what RuneScape's combat even is. It's convenient, comfortable, fashionable, and very high quality. Wait, no, that's actually Bellroy, the sponsor of today's video. Bellroy is an Australian-based accessory company creating beautiful wallets, handbags, tech bags, travel bags, carry bags, and more, with quality and the environment at the forefront of their products, creating sustainable, animal welfare-friendly items that still look and feel good to use. They sent me this wonder kit that I've since used as a tech bag to hold all of the tiny products that I travel with, from chargers to my portable hard drive and even headphones, things that I would always lose or just waste time trying to find in my enormous travel bag. The convenience is one thing, but the quality really sold me. It's not gaudy, it's durable and feels like something that'll last for years and years. Subtle, yet eye-catching. If any of these wonderful products interest you, feel free to check them out in the pinned comment or description. You can also use the QR code on screen to get 10% off your first purchase. Thanks again to Bellroy, and back to the video. RuneScape's combat is strangely defined by precision and rhythm, two traits that I can't correlate to any other popular MMO today. It's wholly unique to RuneScape. These two traits inhabit the majority of this game's skill ceiling, and through mastering them, you are able to take on most of what the game has to offer. Through understanding them, you also begin to parse the tick and tile systems, two things that are intrinsically bonded to precision and rhythm. The latter, rhythm, is governed by the 600 millisecond ticks, and the former, precision, is dependent on the tiles. The game isn't only those things though. Like any great RPG, game knowledge is crucial. Preparation forms success, and success is achieved through repetition, often with lots of death involved. Every individual mechanic in RuneScape boils down to one of those two initial elements, like Prayer, for example, a rather unique skill in the game that allows you to gain powerful buffs for a limited time. These can be buffs like protecting against certain types of attacks, making your own attacks more powerful, regenerating health quicker, and so on. As you have one or multiple prayers active at once, your prayer points drain. That's where the management and preparation side of the game comes in. Because you only have a limited number of back slots, you have to be very careful with how you utilize them. What are you bringing and what are you leaving behind? For a difficult encounter, more often than not, you need a couple of potions that regenerate those rapidly depleting prayer points. But also, you don't. Prayer operates the same way as anything else, on the tick system, meaning when you activate a prayer, the drain effect initiates on the following 600 millisecond increment, the next tick. Understanding this, players have discovered something dubbed prayer flicking, the ability to activate, deactivate, and reactivate a protection prayer in the span of a single tick never initiates the prayer drain, meaning you can functionally sustain your prayer points indefinitely. That sounds pretty damn overpowered. However, it's balanced by other mechanics, rhythm, i.e. skill, and other simultaneously occurring processes. You can't just spam click prayers, since if you batch your click in the next tick or you reactivate far too early in the preceding one, you actually drop the prayer's effect, and for an encounter that deals quite a lot of damage to you, you risk getting hit off prayer, which is to say you don't have any protection prayers on. So not only do you need to be in rhythm to correctly prayer flick, you also need to do so while executing other mechanics. That alone is a pretty enormous challenge that most players are not able to do, me included. As a result, people like us have defaulted to a simpler strategy dubbed lazy flicking, simply activating and deactivating the prayer on the tick you would get hit, and then keeping it off as to not initiate that drain. Easier to wrap your brain around and manage, but still rather difficult to do when you're also juggling your resource and every other boss mechanic at the same time. And that's just prayer, a single facet of the game, augmented by the player's emergent discovery. This prayer flicking method was of course never intended by the developers, but has since been embraced as a source of skill expression that rewards players with less supply use. Again, just prayer though, one of a dozen unique combat-specific systems that often have just as much depth and expression to them, not even mentioning the fact that they all overlap on each other. There is so much more here, and if we want to master the most difficult fights, you must understand these systems. Off-ticking, tile-skipping, stalling, red Xing, tick-eating, total nonsense to the average MMO player, but the blueprint to some of the most skill-expressive elements of RuneScape. All of this is the first realization you have as a new player. Oh shit, this game has more depth than I thought. The lack of intuitive elements may be frustrating, but the reward of figuring those things out might very well be worth it. To really talk about difficulty in the game, I can't just do research. What I say may be accurate, but it's also a bit hollow. How am I to talk about how difficult a game is if I haven't done the difficult parts? So I did. Over the course of a week, I locked myself in the two difficult wave-based challenges in the game, the Colosseum and the Inferno, two pieces of content that are often considered some of the hardest progression points in RuneScape. Now, I think it's important to emphasize progression here, because while these two things are hard and haven't been done by well over 90% of the player base, they are also not even close to the hardest things in the game. There are harder mechanical challenges, such as obtaining a cosmetic recolor of the Oathplate armor through completing the Yama boss in his hard mode variants. But as always with this game, that's not all. The benefit of being a curated sandbox is that RuneScape is able to have self-regulated challenges as well as developer-created ones. Things like soloing the hardest raid on the hardest difficulty is applying the kinds of emergent discoveries figured out all those years ago with prayer flicking to an entirely different level. But we'll get to that. Point is, the Inferno and Colosseum are harder than most content, but even then, goddamn. I knew right away that I wanted to do the Colosseum first. It only has a dozen waves as opposed to the Inferno's 69, nice, making failures in progression less frustrating because you're overall losing less time. The downside is that the Colosseum is mechanically more difficult than the Inferno. The latter requires strict inventory management and careful supply usage while pitting you against simpler waves of enemies, all the while testing your patience. On the other hand, the Colosseum kicks you into the deep end quicker. To achieve the level of skill needed to even take on these challenges, I first needed to grasp the elements of the game that I had never thought about in any other game. That's where the lack of transposability comes in. All of my World of Warcraft achievements mean fucking nothing in Old School RuneScape, and that was never more clear than with the The corrupted Gauntlet acts as a RuneScape inoculation. If you can survive it, you're functionally ready for everything else. At the time an Iron Man often begins the Gauntlet, they haven't really done anything even remotely challenging. What it is for the uninitiated is a mini roguelite. You enter an elven training arena with nothing equipped and must scavenge supplies, fight different enemies, craft armor and weapons, upgrade them, and then face off the main boss, the Hunlif, all within a strict time limit. It's split into 2 steps: preparation, Hunlif. Those 2 steps almost perfectly encapsulate many of the most unique and difficult features of RuneScape's combat. The preparation or prep phase is functionally no different than gearing up and managing your inventory, while fighting the Hunlif is an out-and-out skill check. Much like most of the hardest fights in OSRS, the Hunlif presents the expected core mechanics that you ought master. He's utilizing protection prayers to dictate the kind of combat style you must attack him with, and then at certain increments switches those prayers on you, forcing you to switch weapons to continue dealing damage. Additionally, he attacks you with different styles too. Every few hits, he stomps his little feet and changes styles. He also may switch off prayer, and you only have a few ticks to reactivate it before getting hit off protection, making you pregnant, making you take tons of damage. Additionally, the room has burning tiles that change patterns. You need to make sure that you're always moving and precise with how you're moving. If that weren't enough, he also spawns tornadoes that chase you down for a limited time, and if they reach you, you likely won't survive for more than a couple ticks. To avoid them, you always need to be moving, but also careful with where you're moving to avoid the burning tiles. All of this progressively speeds up as his health decreases, and the last 20 or so % is unbelievably intense for a new player. It feels overwhelming, needing to pay attention to your prayer, your remaining prayer points so you don't run out, needing to reactivate it, always moving and dodging the ever-changing ground pattern, as well as the tornadoes that chase you down. Oh my god. The beauty of even the moment-to-moment challenges of old school RuneScape is that you're required to do them over and over again. On one hand, a long grind is a turnoff for some people. On the other hand, if there's ever a way to gain mastery over a piece of content, it's through repetition. And with this no resource required encounter, the game places a new player in the perfect position to do so. As you try and fail and try again, even the most intense final few % become increasingly more manageable. The encounter psychologically slows down as you start processing where to look and when, how to deal with the mechanics all happening simultaneously. Because at the end of the day, it's all ticks, baby. The fastest the game will ever ask you to react is in 600 milliseconds, meaning that your decision and your actions can be predetermined. Mastering the Gauntlet is akin to mastering anatomy in art school. It acts as the foundation to almost every future encounter. Down the line, you will face challenges that remind you of the Gauntlet, such as the Doom boss, just far harder, faster, with more things to manage at any given moment. What's fascinating about old school RuneScape is how unique each mechanic is and how they synergize with one another. But on their own, they're relatively simple, straightforward even. Such as the way an NPC paths and how in turn you can manipulate that pathing in strategic ways. Early on into your RuneScape playthrough, you learn the concept of Safespotting, a process where you can attack the NPC freely without them ever being able to reach you. You may first encounter this at the Lumbridge cow pen, shooting them over the fence with a ranged or mage weapon. But this simple understanding creates deeper meaning. As you learn the language of the game, you start to use that language to your benefit. A fence is intuitive, obvious. Size is less so. The grid that grounds the world and everyone inhabiting it is also something you yourself manipulate too. Each enemy you fight also is part of that grid, and their varying sizes can create some pretty strange situations. Like if an enemy is larger than a 1x1 tile, you can actually safe spot them in any area that requires pathing that is as thin as 1x1. They will path to you, but will never be able to reach you because they're too big. Notably, this only works for melee NPCs, not those that can just cast spells on you. Seeing game world objects as obstacles to manipulate creates environmental puzzles to solve at any given time, and much like the entire game is emergent, this discovery was too. Most of your early game is spent doing old quests where you mainly utilize safe spots to defeat the supposedly challenging quest bosses. I wouldn't call it fun as much as I'd call it educational. At the time, you may want to actually do something exciting, but maybe unintentionally, you're also starting to see the game world in a different way. These safe spots don't just work on these bosses, they are everywhere and work on most enemies. Now, of course, real modern bosses aren't safe spottable, but they use the same logic, and that logic of pathing is the second crucial step to understand when facing endgame challenges like the Colosseum and Inferno. You see, RuneScape may be rhythm and precision, but it's also planning and knowledge. The latter two elements were arguably far more defined 5 or 10 years ago, before boss mechanics were made more intuitive and reactable. If you want a brief explanation of how or why the philosophy changed, feel free to watch my video on the evolution of bosses. The idea of safe spotting a boss today is, yeah, everybody would probably hate that. However, both the Colosseum and the Inferno were all about safe spotting. Pathing and safe spotting were the root systems that these pieces of content oriented their identities around. The ever-increasing difficulty of waves were solved, as in completed, via meticulous and reactive safe spotting. An increasing number of difficult enemies would spawn in almost random patterns all around the arena, and you would use the environment, these large pillars, to solve the spawn by finding a way to safely collapse these enemies. The second concept used here is line of sight, or LOS. Each NPC in the game has an attack range. If they're melee, it's usually 1 tile, but if they're ranged or magic-based, then it can range from 2 and above. Yet they can only hit you if they see you. If you're behind this pillar and outside their line of sight, they will simply start pathing to you in an attempt to gain line of sight. And because of the way the game has coded pathing, they end up collapsing in the same location, often in a manner that stacks them based on the amount of tiles their model's size inhabits. It's a really strange thing to wrap your brain around initially, but if you see each wave as an advanced game of peekaboo, you start breaking the game apart at its seams. I don't know how much of this was intended, but I do know that all of it stems from unintended discoveries years ago, and that alone is kind of cool, right? Although if it was just about line of sight, then the content wouldn't be particularly difficult. When each wave starts, there's the initial spawn and its associated solution or solve. This is very much a reactive decision. You only have a couple seconds to figure out what to do and where every enemy is. You look at priority targets and those you can't line of sight, so NPCs that you can't stack behind a pillar without also making yourself vulnerable to those that are already getting stacked, and then finding a way to take those NPCs out, to kill them. This becomes more complex when each individual enemy type has its own unique mechanics associated with them, such as these manticores, which ready up a powerful 3-tick attack that launches multicolored projectiles at you, each one dealing damage of a specific type. This forces you to not only solve the wave by managing its pillar stacks, but also do so while paying attention and switching your prayers accordingly. You see how now the rather basic seeming multitasking learned with the Hunlift in the Corrupted Gauntlet is now tested even further? Regardless, when you've created the pillar stack and have killed those lingering enemies, you're now faced with figuring out the second solve, one that requires a different skill set and isn't as reactive. Instead, game knowledge, particularly that of movement and ticks, is prioritized. In some situations, you may have 2 NPCs who attack with ranged, i.e. rangers, stacked behind the pillar, which is easy. You walk out, you pray protect from missiles, which is protect from range, and kill them as they both attack with the same style. However, what if there's an NPC that attacks you with ranged and an NPC that attacks you with mage? If you were to walk out praying ranged, the mage would hit you on the same exact tick as the ranger does, and you're virtually guaranteed to take damage. In a situation where supplies are scarce, requiring you to survive potentially half a dozen or more waves before even attempting the final boss, this is a surefire way to die. So what do you do? If you don't play RuneScape, you likely don't know, because the solution, like with many in the game, is only applicable to this game. You have to learn to off-tick them. This is a relatively high-level strategy wherein you utilize both the line of sight and the tick system to make sure that they attack you at different times, on different ticks, allowing you to pray against both of them. So what does that look like in the Colosseum? You stand in the center tile of this 3-tile wide pillar, and then step 2 tiles out. This is because when you are running instead of walking, you move at 2-tile increments rather than 1-tile increments, allowing you to skip a tile and step out in the line of sight of the furthest NPC in the stack first. This means that the ranger or major in the back sees you 1 tick earlier than the one in the front, who needs to slide out of the stack to start attacking you. What this allows you to do is step out praying against the enemy in the back and then immediately switch to praying against the enemy in the front. All of this is made even more complicated by the fact that damage in Old School RuneScape most of the time isn't calculated on hit when the projectiles hit you, but rather on the animation of the NPC, meaning you can't react to what they're doing, you just have to predict or know it. So when the back enemy who sees me first starts their attack animation, I already know their attack has been registered. I can immediately swap to praying against the front enemy's attack style. And when they start their animation, I swap back to the back one. Now they are sufficiently off-ticked and I can be in the appropriate rhythm. Congratulations, you've just done the easiest solve, as these stacks get far more complicated and difficult to manage. For example, imagine now you are dealing with one of those Manticore enemies as part of the stack rather than just a simple ranger or major. The solution is the same, but they are overlapping in attack styles on the same tick which the Manticore shoots out its ranged or magic attack, making any mistake more punishing. But again, that's relatively simple. Understanding it, you can likely brute force your way to your first Coliseum completion. The solves can and do get far more complex and difficult to even understand. Like, here's one of the best players in the game, No Monkey, doing a notoriously difficult solve for a triple pillar stack, something a new player may not ever attempt to begin with. The solution to this for someone of my skill level is likely to destack them by running to a different pillar and shouldering some hits in the process. On the other hand, No Monkey decides to pull off a set of complex solutions. These are what we'll call Z-pillar solves. The first issue is that he's being hit at range by this mage NPC, which he can't kill because it's at a distance and he only has melee weapons. Meanwhile, the pillar stack involves a ranger, a manticore who will hit him with melee first, and then another ranger behind that, meaning that he won't be able to simply run from the center pillar to off-tick the ranger and manticore, as the back ranger and the middle manticore will see him on the same tick he runs out. In other words, he'll probably die. But before all of that, how do we deal with this major who is hitting him at a distance? Since we understand how line of sight works, we need to drag him to melee by standing on the opposite side of the pillar. But in doing so, we open ourselves up to getting hit by the monolithic stack, right? This is where an advanced understanding of off-ticking at LOS comes into play. Okay, so get ready, hear me out, this gets a little bit complicated. You can stand on the centermost tile like you would when off-ticking normally, but instead of stepping out 2 tiles to the side, you step out 2 tiles diagonally, which will cause the furthest back ranger to see you first and attack. Then you step back to safety behind the pillar on the centermost tile for exactly 1 tick, since their attack is now on its cooldown, as in they have to wait another few ticks before they will attack again. Then you must step out like you would be off-ticking them normally, praying against the manticore first. Only then can you swap to ranged. This is because the back ranger is still cooling down from his first attack against you, meaning his attack lines up with the front ranger instead of the middle manticore. If that weren't complicated enough, you now have to manage this rhythmic cycle of prayers for long enough to kill them all. But also you have to do that while still being aware of the major who was attacking you, and then go back and kill them first when they're in melee range. I think it's fair to say there isn't a single individual mechanic or set of mechanics in any MMORPG that I have ever played that is even 1/10 as difficult. Having done the most challenging bosses in World of Warcraft, their difficulty stems from perfect group-wide execution, so doing simple things together perfectly. The more people are involved, the more variables there are for error. That's why WoW's top-end raiding scene is so difficult. Each player must play perfectly. On the other hand, RuneScape challenges are purely individual and as a result can be far more demanding of that individual. And all of what we just talked about is barely scratching the fucking surface. I know, what the fuck is this game? I really don't know. This is insane. Hey, editing Theorywise here. I wanted to quickly hop in and clarify something I think I did a poor job of describing in the original script. World of Warcraft raiding, particularly in the World First race, is unbelievably challenging. What Blizzard does is create an incredibly tightly tuned boss fight and a set of synergizing mechanics that are like a puzzle to solve, a puzzle given to the best guilds and their associated raid leaders and analysts to piece together step by step. The raid leader breaks apart the fight, analyzes footage, creates fine-tuned solutions, and then expects the raiders to adapt to them at a moment's notice. There are right and wrong answers, and they need to be followed precisely. Any individual mechanic, when seen in a vacuum, is simple, yet collectively it's very, very challenging, especially for those that are figuring out these mechanics one step at a time. These raiders are setting the standard for everyone else. Every other guild will adapt to these strategies pioneered during the World First race. There is less malleability in each WoW fight. There are less choices to make, less individual points of skill expression, but collectively, there's nothing else like it. The kinds of strategies employed by the best players to achieve speedruns and min-max certain boss fights has led to a top 1% skill ceiling that spikes in its attainability. That's why I said the difference in skill between the top 5% of players and the bottom 95% of players is equal to the difference between the top 5% of players and the top 1% of players. What I need to do and learn to sit comfortably with the noob types and Port Khazards of the world would be akin to starting fresh-faced in Lumbridge, like I did less than 2 years ago. The amount of knowledge I need to acquire is no less extreme, but the skill barriers between that are 1 million times more demanding. A couple months ago, I learned the most challenging raid, the Theater of Blood, and spent around 60 hours becoming adequate at it in 3, 4, and 5-man groups. Getting over 100 KC, I was pretty proud of myself. But then I looked toward players who are soloing this group-based content in its hard mode, which I have never even done in the first place, let alone attempted to solo. There's an entire group of players who are known for their skill in this single piece of content. Their knowledge of the seemingly simple mechanics extends to how well they can bend and break them. How they can stall certain boss damage using weird niche spells, how they can utilize spellbook swap to perfectly duo encounters never meant to be duoed. I reached out to one of those players, a streamer and content creator S2L, to try and understand the basics of some of these strategies. Needless to say, I barely understood his response. The intrigue stems from how meticulously planned out these group-based speedruns are, precisely because the game is governed by its tick system. You can frankly develop a tick-by-tick strategy that can be followed by each player, and if executed perfectly, your run just becomes dependent on hit-based RNG. Interestingly, this is somewhat similar to how my top-end rating in WoW used to be. The difference, of course, is that the groups are smaller, so individual actions are rendered more important and challenging. Similarly, most of the tech used is not intended, it's discovered, meaning there's no big blue ball to soak or fire to avoid. The actions taken by your group are granular. You could make an entire video essay on just the kinds of strategies developed via the flowcharts and bizarre tech discovered. They're using items and spells that regular players likely forgot even exist in the game, but because RuneScape has so many overlapping, unique mechanics in it, they become elements to consider, like how the Phoenix Necklace synergizes with absorbing damage, or, as I mentioned, how this random spell actually stalls the encounter. Not to get into another tangent about how this works, but the rabbit hole of utterly bizarro tech that these speedruns utilize is no different than speedrunning in other games. Like, you are breaking the game, you should be doing this at GDQ, and RuneScape has actually done this at GDQ. Except these mechanics are strangely embraced by Jagex. The game isn't designed around them. It's not like the newest boss will force you to learn about stalling with Humidify to only use one PNEC every 5 ticks. That actually means something if you were curious, but you could do that if you want. And often because this game takes so long to complete, these time saves do feel satisfying to learn. They are part of the ecosystem. Finding out about these things is like deciding to climb Mount Everest and at what appears to be the summit, breaking through the skyline only to see a mountain twice as tall and twice as steep. Realizations that I frankly never had in World of Warcraft or any other MMO. Not because I'm some savant at those games, far from it, but because individual skill expression is never incentivized in this way. It's never at the forefront of their most demanding encounters. Meaning what I need to do as a player in the hardest WoW raid is fall in line with everyone else. The opportunity to do something on your own is relatively rare and often relegated to certain classes and specializations. Ultimately, your individual skill expression as a player is masked by group-wide success. It's worth noting that this is not a bad thing. I don't think World of Warcraft can or should do the kinds of solo challenges that RuneScape does. It's simply not built to. It has different classes and synergies that rely on the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS. To create the deepest content, it must utilize that core system. RuneScape has never been built on that, which creates different successes in its content. The sheer amount of depth in RuneScape is beyond anything I've ever seen, and the process of almost breaking the back end of the game reminds me of the kind of tech employed by the best speedrunners. You're not engaging in the game through its rigid rule set, you're finding ways to bend and manipulate that rule set to overcome its greatest challenges. So many of my videos about RuneScape use the term emergent gameplay to define player discoveries, exploits that have since been embraced by the developers as they are exploits that add depth to the game in rather unique ways. The systems may break, but in a rewarding way. They aren't cheats, they're innovations. I can't name a single boss in the entire game where emergent discovery isn't at the forefront of its meta strategy, and each solution discovered by players is dependent on the 4 stacked pillars of RuneScape's combat: rhythm, precision, tiles, and ticks. With game knowledge as the blueprint, you begin to manage these 4 elements together and start to master the game. Doing so is far easier said than done though. Having played well over 6,000 hours now has allowed me to learn the basic solves in the Inferno and Colosseum. It has allowed me to complete some of the hardest fights in the game. Yet completion itself has a different meaning in RuneScape. Killing something once isn't the goal, not always. You must kill something dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of times to receive its output, the reward. And due to the game's grind, this culture of solutions formed. If all you ever had to do was kill a boss once, then chances are we wouldn't have found all of these novel ways to speed up the process of doing this content. It's only because it's so demanding of your time does time saving become a value in and of itself, and when it has a value, it promotes creativity and ingenuity. Rules are only sought to be broken when they feel restrictive enough to warrant breaking. The speed at which you react to certain situations, manipulate certain encounters, utilize your pinpoint mouse precision to perfectly switch between prayers and items all form the backbone to greater game knowledge. And this is never made more clear than with the highest skill part of the entire game: the I told you we'll come back to it, and I feared this moment because if you thought PvE was complicated, holy fuck. There are 2 important points to touch on before we dive deep into the nitty-gritty of what is easily the most insanely complicated and disturbingly deep portion of the game. Each tick can batch 10 actions within it, meaning that you can click and do 10 actions in an individual tick, only if those actions aren't restricted by any tick delays. For example, eating hard food in the game, meaning physical food, not like a potion, puts you on a delay, both in your next attack and how long you must wait to eat another hard food, which is why you often see new players spam click food over and over again without it being consumed. Actions that don't have an internal delay would be switching prayers. That's how you can prayer flick, switching gear, which allows you to click in your inventory and then it gets equipped at the start of the next tick. This means that you can effectively switch 10 pieces of gear in the span of a single tick. A 1-tick 10-way switch requires 10 precise clicks in the span of 600 milliseconds. That alone is just unattainable by most human beings. So it's fair to say that the best PvPers aren't human, because what the fuck am I even looking at? It doesn't become any easier when you understand that some items have separate delays associated with them, like how drinking a potion has a separate delay to eating hard food, which has a separate delay to eating a tick food, such as these weird octopus-looking things called karambwans. You can eat all of these, or eat and drink all of these, in the span of a single tick if you click them in the correct order. I know this sounds like irrelevant bullshit, but it's worth mentioning because a lot of PvP is very much oriented around utilizing same tick actions, and not really in a rhythm. In one of my first ever videos on the game, I compared Old School RuneScape's PvE combat to a summer sonnet. It's all driven by melody, by being part of the strange music of the game, being on rhythm. Meanwhile, I compared PvP to improvisational jazz. Your goal is to not have a rhythm, because in having one, your opponent can predict your actions. And because the game is all trading blows in 600 millisecond increments, predictions are the separation between living and dying. The best PvPers in OSRS are those who can manage its deep systems alongside their own unpredictability and forward thinking. It's like a game of chess that isn't dictated by rigid turns. PvP is multifaceted and has since been separated by player-invented brackets. Things like pures, zerkers, and so on are all different types of accounts that have micromanaged their combat stats to fit the most min-maxed output while remaining in certain level brackets, the most high skill of which is hybriding. It's often done by players with maxed combat stats and involves meticulous switching between all three combat styles, mage, range, and melee, to execute unpredictable moves and overwhelm your opponent via snowballing actions. I know that sounds vague, so let's start talking specifics. In a high-skill hybrid matchup, you need to manage your prayers as you do across the entire game, switching in response to what you think your opponent will be attacking you with. This is the first facet of prediction. And because these protection prayers are visible over your head, you also can use them to trick your opponent. Your damaging prayers, on the other hand, are not visible, so keep that in mind. It's also worth noting that enemies have the ability to drain your prayer via the use of another prayer called Smite, so in Outlast matchups, utilizing this tech could very well be the defining factor. You are also switching between the styles, which involves changing your gear. This can be between 2 and 10 items that give you accuracy and damage in the style that you're attacking with. Like if you want to hit your opponent with ranged, you would have a much easier time doing so in ranged gear, as it gives a ton of accuracy. On the other hand, certain gear has defenses that make it vulnerable to other styles, such as ranged gear being great against magic and melee gear being vulnerable to it. And because damage is on animation, not on hit, executing a one-tick switch on the same tick you would attack on makes your action virtually impossible to fully protect against. Another reason why predictions are such an enormous part of top-end PvP. Would you believe me if I said that this wasn't even 1% of the complexity? Because while switching is hard, sure, and predicting prayers certainly requires a ton of game knowledge and awareness, there's also movement. Most hybrid setups utilize the Ancient Spellbook, which gives you access to freezing spells that lock your enemy in place in a single tile for a short time. While they're frozen, you can stand on the same tile. This is called death dotting or DDing. If you do this, they can't attack you until they're unfrozen, meaning you can heal up and change your gear, items, prepare, and in some ways even recuperate. When watching a high-end PvP fight, this is like clinching during a boxing match, where the opponent leans into the other one in a kind of hug that disallows the opponent from attacking them for a moment. In boxing, clinching is done to stop attacks, recuperate, frustrate, and so on. DDing is done for the exact same reasons. In fact, it's an abject advantage as your model disappears in theirs. It becomes harder for them to see what you will attack them with next. But that's not all, because skilled players can actually attack the DD target and step back under them all within the span of a single tick, which means that if they click you as you're stepping out to attack, they won't retaliate. They can't, because retaliations happen on the next tick. So what is often the recommended strategy when being DD'd is to spam click, essentially batch your action with theirs, all the while predicting their attacks and prayer accordingly and even healing up. Movement doesn't stop there though. This is where I can finally talk about how bizarre movement mechanics in RuneScape are. I already mentioned that running in RuneScape is done by doubling the speed of walking by causing your character to skip a tile each tick, meaning that you are literally skipping every odd tile, allowing you to avoid certain one-ground tile effects in boss encounters. But what I haven't touched on is your true tile. You see, movement is funky since your player model isn't ever caught up to where your actual body is. It's essentially always a tick or so behind, so where you actually are isn't where your model looks like it is. It's always a bit behind. That's why there are plugins like the True Tile Indicator highlighting where you really are, something I view as almost mandatory to anyone trying to play the game seriously. In PVM, this means you need to pay attention to your true tile, not just your character model, because your true tile might get hit by something you don't look like you're standing on or near. In PvP, human error comes into play. You can confuse your opponent in a way you wouldn't be able to a computer by utilizing your true tile to your advantage, by stepping out of range, into range, moving at every tick, all the while attacking them, which makes you really challenging to click on in an effort to retaliate. That is made more confusing by certain weapons that stall your animation, root your character model in place while your true tile itself is running and doing all kinds of things, meaning that while they may spam click your character model, you're actually right behind them specking them out. Nothing personnel, kid. Observing a high-end PvP matchup is in equal parts awe-inspiring and confusing in a way no other MMO is. PvP in MMOs is often unfun to watch, mainly because it's just kind of a clusterfuck of overlapping spell effects. To appreciate the skill, you need to have the game knowledge to process what is even happening. While that is somewhat true for RuneScape, the skill itself is also really easy to appreciate too, in the same way you can a professional Counter-Strike game. You can just look at how well they aim and sit back and awe, damn, they're good. The same applies here. You may not understand the insane depths of PvP, but just watching them do like 15 different actions every 1.5 seconds is absurd, and that is rendered even more absurd when you realize just how meticulously planned those actions are. They are all in preparation for a specific kind of execution, a momentary setup to a potential KO. Paying attention to even the most subtle tells is a surefire way to improve your moment-to-moment PvPing. Things like your experience drop appearing before you even see the hit splat on your enemy. Since experience drops correlate with your damage dealt, you can actually assume the amount of damage you're about to deal by simply watching the numbers on your screen, and then setting your action in accordance. You attack the enemy, see a big XP drop, know that this means you're going to hit hard, and go in for a powerful melee execution to snowball that advantage. And because they're busy eating up, as in being delayed from acting against you, you can continue that snowball. This is likely the most obvious subtle tell though. There is a stranger element called the PID system. PID stands for Player Identification Number. When you log into a game world, you're assigned a PID that will then randomize at a certain increment of ticks, so let's say around 25 to 35 seconds. The reason this exists is so the game can process multiple actions being done at the same time, and then choose which action to prioritize. In a basic sense, all this means is sometimes your hit will land earlier rather than later. In PvP, this is crucial information if two people are attacking at the same time. In a 1v1 fight, you always need to be aware of who has the PID advantage, because that person can KO you in a single tick. You cannot react to some of their actions as they appear to be quicker and batched. But when the PID swaps, as in now you have the early hit advantage, now you must act in accordance to that. It's a system that is balanced on the ebb and flow of battle, one that obviously wasn't designed to ever be noticed, but now is a core element of PvP. Going for a KO when you don't have PID is often a bad decision against a great player, because you're giving them an opportunity to react to your action, and all they need is an opportunity. They are now able to take-eat most of your damage, utilizing that 3-step healing process I outlined earlier. I can't believe I'm about to say this again, but I'm barely scratching the surface here. PvP in OSRS is both outwardly impressive and houses the kinds of absurd skill expressions that may only be found in the most management-heavy competitive games. There really is nothing else like it. Yet due to that, the barrier to entry is beyond most players. If the vast majority of players aren't engaging in some of the top-end PVM, then asking them to do the PvP is like asking a toddler to bench 500 pounds. It's not their fault though. In many ways, it's like the fighting game community. The skill sets between games transfers, meaning that people who are already great at fighting games are able to be great at just about all of them. So when a new fighting game releases, the skill floor has already been pulled up by existing fans of the genre, making new players less likely to play. This applies to OSRS in a rather interesting way, because its skill set doesn't translate to or from any other game, except, I don't know, maybe like Counter-Strike? Do we want to watch Shroud play OSRS? I don't know. What this means is that no new players are coming in with an existing talent, and existing players are only becoming better. This is a surefire way to create a hyper-niche community that is impossible to penetrate. Even me, who loves spending too much time learning shit and really does love the PvP in Old School RuneScape more than any other MMO that I've ever played, can't really do it. Not just because I'm bad, which yeah, I am, but also because I don't even know where to start. LMS only functions as an introduction, and when you're risking your hard-earned gold in matchups against players who have been doing this for 2 decades, you simply don't stand a chance. For as much as some people like brushing RuneScape off as too RNG reliant in its damage output, the skill ceiling of PvP is an immediate example of just how wrong those people are. There is no world ever where any bad player will ever take a match off of Odablock, West Ham, or any other ultra-talented players that have made a brand out of being the best at PvP. It's not that Odablock will simply RNG his way to victory via damage rolls, but rather that new players likely won't even be able to click him, let alone roll damage. I recently participated in the Dead Man Game Mode, a multi-week event where Jagex opens up new servers with expedited experience rates and unique mechanics and systems all oriented around PvP. You can essentially fight players almost anywhere in the world for their loot. This is of course insular, restricted to those game worlds. It's split into level brackets for fairness, and I viewed it as a great opportunity to learn. I spent much of my time just taking little fights, trying to earn some gold, and hopefully becoming a little bit better. But as the game mode drew to a close, and I have certainly become a bit better, I still really can't do anything with that. The scene is too niche and sadly a bit too established. There have been many showcases of difficulty in RuneScape, both in this video and just in the content creation scene. You can look at the best PVMers like Port Khazard spend 6 hours doing the hardest fight in the entire game without a single piece of food or a single prayer potion, a test of skill, knowledge, preparation, and patience. That last word right there is the final branch of skill expression that I want to mention in this video, since it's often overlooked in RuneScape, let alone other games. When trying to explain RuneScape's crazy skill ceiling, it's easy to point to top-end PVM and PvP, because while it doesn't translate to other games, it's pretty simple to see just how much skill these things take. Patience, on the other hand, is often maligned. The grindiness of old school RuneScape is its most recognizable feature, yet for all those looking at it from a distance, it may be a turnoff. Why do I want to spend 250 hours cutting a tree, even if all of those high skill cap things exist and are awesome and cool and exciting? How long do I need to spend doing monotonous labor until I can even experience them? And that's fair, it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone in the same way PVM and PvP isn't for everyone, right? Some people just don't have the patience or time. Patience is a virtue, but it's also a skill. It takes a lot of it to do something extreme. No less extreme than PVM and PvP, just extreme in a different way. Months ago, the first new skill for old school RuneScape was released, Sailing. A number of players raced to be the first level 99, which is like the max level, a demanding challenge that had many people spend almost a week doing nothing but playing old school RuneScape actively and meticulously. Minimal sleep, maximum effort. But for those that don't know, experience gains don't stop upon reaching level 99. In fact, they stop at 200 million experience gained in that skill. Achieving 99 is 13 million experience. Since experience doesn't stop after, neither do the high scores, so some players wanted to race to 200 million. The amount of time required here is one thing, more than a month of playing upward of 16 to 20 hours a day, not passively, actively, doing what amounts to be the same thing over and over and over again. Whether you think it's stupid or not is irrelevant. Whether you think it is healthy, well, it's not healthy, but it is undeniably impressive in a morbid kind of way. It's only so because of the patience and determination required to do it. It's not as easy as to say, well, if I earned money playing the game, I could do it. Because no, you definitely couldn't. Doing one thing for more than half the day, every day, for many days is only even possible when that thing isn't extremely taxing. It is a level of skill, a pretty damn impressive level of skill at that. Now, that's not to say we should promote this kind of behavior constantly. That would just be unethical. But what I am saying is that perhaps long grinds, even the worst ones, such as runecraft and agility, harbor a level of skill in relation to the amount of patience and determination they require. Yet another element of RuneScape that simply doesn't exist in most games. Hell, it barely even exists in other MMOs. It's worth acknowledging and appreciating. It took me around 1 week to complete both the Inferno and Colosseum, and within that week, I took a 2 to 3 day break, meaning I spent a grand total of around 20 hours in the Inferno and around 35 hours in the Colosseum.
Hit him. Just hit him. Just hit him. Run out, 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 run out.
We're good, we're good.
Okay. Jesus Christ. We
Holy
did it!
shit.
We got the quiver. Yippee.
Holy fucking shit, bro.
Cheesy.
Yes! I wasn't calculating the amount of attempts in the latter, however, using some death's coffer deductions, I believe it was around 50 to 60. I know I don't have the most patience, so I chose the more mechanically intense yet shorter variant, a trial by fire to learn the mechanics that I will eventually use in the Inferno. I downed the Inferno on my 13th attempt and saw the final boss, Tiskal Zuk, on my 9th. I then saw him again on my 11th and killed him on my 13th. It was long, arduous, tedious, and not particularly fun. I have my Inferno cape though, something many people in my other videos discussing the game constantly pointed out my lack of when I shared my thoughts on the endgame. Now that I have that and the comparable quiver from the Colosseum, I am confident in saying that Old School RuneScape is easily the hardest MMO I have ever played. I say this as someone who hasn't even breached the true skyline to see the peaks of its skill ceiling, things very few players ever even do. It should be clear that I haven't done the majority of the things I discussed in this video. While I am happy with my skill-based achievements, I am light years away from the best players in the game. So I want to thank many of the named and unnamed individuals that helped my research on this subject. I reached out to the best players in each unique area, asked them many questions about the subject, and have done my best to synthesize an interpretation of what they said for this video. I am blown away by just how communal this game really is. I've said it before, but so many people seem to discredit the way RuneScape's community interacts. It's a grindy, long-term game, and due to that, is dismissed as antisocial, solo, individual. And this video reiterated that in some ways, right? All of this individual skill expression must not foster a community-driven environment. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because each and every one of these discoveries was made by the community, spread through it, taught by it. Without the best wiki page in gaming history, I wouldn't have ever managed to get as far as I have, and I think I say that for a lot of players. By being so difficult, by being so obtuse and occasionally unintuitive or convoluted, RuneScape has retained the kind of explorative sharing of information and discovery that most MMOs today have completely lost. They may be easier to get into or more immediately understandable through simplicity and a lack of systems, but what they aren't is social. Each discovery, even through my own research, was only possible because of how socially pollinated these subjects are, made all the more impressive by how insular and independent the game itself feels, not just in its gameplay, but in the scope of MMOs entirely. As I've said many times, there are no other MMOs like RuneScape, certainly none of the popular ones. I can map my knowledge of WoW onto just about every mechanic in Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls Online, and Final Fantasy XIV, using almost the exact same language at that. I distinctly could not in RuneScape. So it must only have been through sociability did the community manage to create such a collectively impressive understanding of challenging, unintuitive, and unique mechanics. RuneScape is the hardest, most grueling, time-consuming, obtuse, unintuitive, painful MMO I have ever played. And that's maybe why I keep playing it. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to my channel members for supporting my passion. If you want to support my work, consider becoming a member of this channel to gain early access to my Fireside podcast and more. If not, just stick around, subscribe, like, and I'll see you next time.